Thank you, Sherry. Thanks for joining us today. Quickly, if you are seeking ASHA CEUs for attending this webinar, make sure you attend the entire 60 minutes of the live session. You can complete your CE forms on a print copy and mail them to Darlene Davis at the address that you see on the slide or in your handout. And also because of this time, because many of us are sheltering in place, you can also complete your CE forms on an Adobe Reader and save it and email it to darlenekdavis@pearson.com. If that method is more convenient for you, make sure that you mail or email your CE forms by November 24th in order to get credit. And we can go ahead and get started. This session provides speech language pathologists and other professionals who conduct in-depth language assessments with an overview of the CELF Preschool-3. As Sherry said, my name is Patricia Ybarra. I am a research director at Pearson Clinical Assessments, and I'm also a speech language pathologist. The disclosures for today are that I'm employed by Pearson Clinical Assessment, and Pearson is the ASHA continuing education provider for this session. There are no relevant non-financial relationships to disclose. So as I said, Pearson Clinical Assessment is the sponsor of this webinar. The assessment division of Pearson develops and distributes assessments and intervention tools for speech language pathologists. This webinar covers information that pertains to the effective and appropriate use of the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals preschool 3. No other assessments will be discussed during this presentation. This is our agenda for today. We're going to cover these two major topics. I'll describe the features of the new CELF Preschool-3 with a focus on administration and scoring of each subtest. And we'll follow that with a review of the test development and research. We'll have time at the end for questions and answers. At the end of this webinar, you will be able to list at least two differences between CELF Preschool-2 and CELF Preschool-3, explain how to obtain and score the connected speech sample subtest using the No Juice book, and you'll be able to list at least two subtests that comprise the Academic Language Readiness Index and the Early Literacy Index. So what is CELF Preschool-3? It was just published this past summer, and like its predecessors, it is an individually administered norm reference instrument that can be used to assess the language and communication skills of children ages 3 to 6 years old. It's a practical and efficient clinical tool for identifying, diagnosing, and performing follow-up evaluations of language and communication deficits in preschool-age children. CELF Preschool-3 subtests parallel the CELF 5 tests. So if you're a CELF 5 user, you'll notice that. And to increase the ceiling of the CELF Preschool-3 and facilitate score consistency at ages 5 and 6 years, which are the ages shared by the two tests, the CELF Preschool-3 and the CELF 5 share some test items. The CELF Preschool-3 can be used to determine if a child has a language impairment. Beyond that, it can also be used to describe the nature of the impairment. So depending on the subtests that are administered, it can be used to describe the nature of the impairment, such as strengths, weaknesses, affected language modalities, if it's receptive language impairment, expressive language impairment, or both, what content areas are affected, and the conditions that enable the child to communicate most effectively. Also, you can use this tool to answer referral questions regarding early classroom and literacy fundamentals and social language behaviors and communication in context. To better reflect current diagnostic and assessment practices in various settings, the CELF Preschool-3 offers a revised assessment process in comparison to the CELF Preschool-2. This assessment process continues to give professionals flexibility in selecting and administering only those subtests and checklists relevant to the specific objectives of their evaluation. The CELF Preschool-3 features 2 new subtests that can be used independently and are not required to obtain index scores. The Connected Speech Sample subtest was designed to further evaluate language skills in the context of a language sample, and it increases diagnostic support. The Pragmatic Activities Checklist assesses communication in context. It was designed to assess social language behaviors that may interfere with a child's interactions and performance in various settings. The CELF Preschool-3 offers 3 additional subtests that yield scaled scores, allowing professionals to easily compare a child's performance to that of typically developing peers. So the subtests that now offer scaled scores in CELF Preschool-3 are the Phonological Awareness subtest, the Preliteracy rating scale, and the Descriptive Pragmatics profile. The CELF Preschool-3 features 2 new index scores, the Early Literacy Index and the Academic Language Readiness Index. The CELF Preschool-3 subtests included in the CELF Preschool-2 battery were broadened in scope. Easier and more difficult items were added to more adequately cover the range of developmental skills. The CELF Preschool-3 has expanded the floor of the test to provide greater diagnostic value for children ages 3 and 4. Additionally, it expanded the ceiling of the test to provide greater diagnostic value for children ages 5 and 6. Test items were modified based on examiner feedback, and CELF Preschool-3 also provides updated norms and digital options on Pearson's Q Interactive and Q Global platforms. The CELF Preschool-3 screening test kit is now available for purchase separately as well. Compared to the CELF Preschool-2, the CELF Preschool-3 discontinue rules have been reduced to minimize formal testing time. The CELF Preschool-2 stimulus books were reformatted, so the CELF Preschool-3 includes 1 stimulus book that contains verbal and visual stimuli and administration directions for each subtest, except for the Pragmatic Activities Checklist, the Descriptive Pragmatics Profile, and the Preliteracy Rating Scale subtests. Like the CELF Preschool-2, the CELF Preschool-3 includes a no juice book that is now used for the Connected Speech Sample subtest. The no juice story has been repurposed as a story retell task for the Connected Speech Sample subtest in CELF Preschool-3 instead of the recalling sentences in context task that you see in CELF Preschool-2. Your options for administration and scoring are, of course, the print option is available for administration, and it includes the print manual, stimulus books, and record forms. Your scoring options, if you're doing the administration and print, are that you can score manually, and also you can use the Q Global scoring platform. The Q Global option includes test administration with a digital manual and stimulus books using any web-enabled computer or tablet and a print record form. Scoring options are also manual and Q Global. The CELF Preschool-3 scoring is available on Q Global, which is a web-based platform that calculates all scores and presents test results in an easy-to-understand narrative report that can be downloaded to a word processing program and incorporated into clinical reports. The CELF Preschool-3 Q Global score reports are a separate component from the CELF Preschool-3 kit. The reports may be purchased individually or as an unlimited subscription annually. In addition, a digital version of the CELF Preschool-3 manual and stimulus book are available on Q Global. The Q Interactive option is an integrated digital system for test administration, scoring, and reporting using 2 iPads connected via Bluetooth. The CELF Preschool-3 is also available for purchase on Q Interactive. An examiner uses 1 tablet to give instructions to the child, record and score responses, take notes, and control the visual stimuli presentation, and the child uses the other tablet to view and respond to subtest items. The CELF Preschool-3 offers 10 norm reference subtests that yield scaled scores and 2 supplementary subtests that yield criterion reference scores. The 10 norm reference subtests are all pictured here. All 10 subtests were on the CELF Preschool-2, although there are a few changes in subtest names. The sentence comprehension on CELF Preschool-3 was sentence structure on CELF Preschool-2. And following directions was concepts and following directions on CELF Preschool-2. And then word classes no longer includes word classes total. And I'll discuss in greater detail when we look specifically at the word classes subtest. Phonological Awareness, Descriptive Pragmatics Profile, and Preliteracy Rating Scale provided age-based criterion scores in CELF Preschool-2, and these subtests now provide scaled scores in CELF Preschool-3. And if you notice also the column on the end, growth scale values have been added to help measure the child's progress. As a diagnostic battery, the CELF Preschool-3 continues to offer a balance of items across receptive and expressive modalities, as well as language content and language structure. Additionally, CELF Preschool-3 offers more information on early literacy skills and pragmatic skills than its predecessors. Standardized test scores and composite scores, a core language score, and index scores enhance clinical decision-making and descriptions of communication skills and academic language readiness. The 10 norm reference subtests are grouped based on similar assessment measures to yield composite scores. Different combinations of 7 of the 10 subtests yield the core language score, the receptive language index, the expressive language index, the language structure index, and the language content index. 2 of the 7 subtests, along with the descriptive pragmatics profile, yield the academic language readiness index. The CELF Preschool-3 also offers an early literacy index consisting of the phonological awareness subtest and the Preliteracy rating scale. Several changes were made to the subtests on CELF Preschool-3. The CELF Preschool-3 subtests included in the CELF Preschool-2 battery were broadened in scope. Easier and more difficult items were added to more adequately cover the range of developmental skills. The administration time for the 3 subtests required to determine the core language score is 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the child's age and responsiveness. The time it takes to administer the remaining subtests varies depending on the child's age, their language ability, the level of motivation, and the subtests that are selected. For the sentence comprehension subtest, the child identifies a picture that matches the sentence read aloud by the examiner. Sentence comprehension assesses language structure receptively. To present the items, the examiner uses the stimulus book to show the picture stimuli and the record form to document responses. So here is an example of one of the items. The examiner would say, let's look at these pictures. I'm going to point to the picture that shows I can wear this. Now you point to the picture that shows I can eat this. The correct answer is identified in bold color on the record form. The sentence comprehension subtest measures the child's understanding of sentence structures. Item analysis tables like this one provide information on the type of sentence structures with which the child is struggling. From the item analysis table here, you see a breakdown of the different types of sentence structures assessed, including those with adjectives, prepositional phrases, relative clauses, and subordinate clauses. So once you have administered each subtest, you can use the item analysis table to note which items were answered incorrectly and group them to determine if there's some sort of pattern or area that you want to look at more closely or possibly target in a treatment plan. For the word structure subtest, the child completes a sentence using a closed procedure with the targeted structure or structures. The subtest requires a verbal response. So this is what you're going to find on the record form for responses. Also, administration directions were added for the demonstration items between test items in the word structure subtest to improve a child's understanding of the expectations of the task. And here's an example of an item on the word structure subtest. So the examiner would say, here, I'm going to show you some pictures and say some things about them. I want you to help me by finishing some of the things I say. I'll do the first one. Listen, here is a boy, and here is a girl. The idea is for the examiner to demonstrate use of the copula as part of the response. And here's the item analysis table for the word structure subtest. This subtest measures the expressive use of various morphological structures. And the structures assessed include prepositions, possessive nouns, verb tenses, pronouns, to name a few. For expressive vocabulary, the child names an object, a person, or an activity portrayed in a picture. Expressive vocabulary contributes to the new Academic Language Readiness Index, along with following directions and the Descriptive Pragmatics profile subtests. The calculator, telephone, and newspaper were removed. Those of you that are CELF Preschool-2 users will be happy to know that. And here's an example item. So the examiner would say, look at this picture. This is a bird. Look at this picture. What is this? Here's the item analysis table for the expressive vocabulary subtest. It targets words in semantic categories that reflect typical language experiences of children ages 3 to 6. The items measured include verbs as well as academic categories like science and math. For following directions, the child points to pictures in response to oral directions. This subtest contributes to the new Academic Language Readiness Index, along with the expressive vocabulary and the descriptive pragmatics profile subtests. Following directions subtest includes a new task of following directions by pointing to body parts. This developmentally easier concept improved the floor of the subtest, allowing children with emerging skills to participate. Children ages 5 and 6 begin the subtest at a later start point and follow directions by pointing to animals. Here is the new task for 3 and 4-year-olds, pointing to body parts. And 5 and 6-year-old children point to animals. If the child does not correctly point to all of the familiarization items, whether it be body parts or animals, do not administer the test items in following directions. These items are grouped by complexity of directions and type of command, so whether it's a temporal command, a conditional command, or sequential, and also if the direction includes serial orientation. The recalling sentences For the recalling sentences subtest, the child imitates sentences presented by the examiner. So the examiner would say, I'm going to say something to you. I want you to listen carefully and say exactly what I say. Let's try one. Say, the dog is eating. The item analysis provides insight into the kinds of sentence types that the child can produce expressively. Children's linguistic productions in imitative sentence tasks reflect the content and structure of spontaneous speech. They filter the sentences they hear using their own language system, and then repeat the sentence using their own language rules. For basic concepts, the child points to a picture that illustrates the targeted concept presented by the examiner. The basic concepts subtest in CELF Preschool-2 provides scale scores for children ages 3 and 4 and criterion scores for children ages 5 and 6. Again, items in the basic concepts and following directions subtests were revised to provide separate assessment of semantic concepts and following directions. This change resulted in more difficult concepts being added to the basic concepts subtest. So CELF Preschool-3 provides scaled scores for children ages 3 to 6. The demo item for this subtest goes like this. The examiner says, look at these children, and the examiner should point to each picture as they talk about it. This is a baby. The baby is little. This is a girl. She is big. And this is a boy. He is big too. Look at the children again. I am going to point to the one who is little. And then the examiner would point to the picture of the baby and say, the baby is little, and then proceed to the trial item. Basic concepts assesses different categories of concepts, including directional, positional, attributes, size, same and different. Word classes, in this subtest, the child chooses 2 words or pictures that are related from a choice of 3 or 4 words or pictures. The expressive section, where a child explains the relationship between the selected word pair that was dropped from the standardized administration of CELF Preschool-3. This task was repurposed as a possible extension testing procedure for exploring a child's strengths and weaknesses. And I'm going to talk about what extension testing is in just a few slides. Here's an example item for the word classes subtest. So the examiner would say, I'm going to say some words and show you some pictures. 2 of the words go together. Look and listen as I say the words. And so the examiner would point to each picture as it's named: bread, shoe, and apple. Bread and apple are the two words that go together best. An analysis of the child's responses can provide a preliminary description of the semantic class relationships that the child understands. Use the word classes item analysis table to determine error patterns in the child's responses. After testing and interpreting the CELF Preschool-3 results, consider using extension testing to learn more about the factors that may have contributed to a child's errors. The errors may result from task or format novelty, task complexity, length or complexity of instructions, linguistic content of subtest items, or type of response required. By systematically varying subtest content, directions, and the responses required, you can determine where and when the child's ability to respond correctly begins to break down. So you can use extension testing to establish conditions under which the child can perform successfully. The results of extension testing allow for making judgments about the degree of difference between the conditions under which the child performs the skill proficiently and his or her performance in real life and academic situations. And so in the manual, there are suggested activities for extension testing for each subtest. And here's an example of extension testing activities for the word classes subtest. You use extension testing to further examine the child's comprehension of word relationships by semantic class for this subtest. So before extension testing, review the items in error and note any pattern of errors by semantic category. You can also compare the child's performance on other subtests that examine semantic knowledge, such as the expressive vocabulary subtest or the basic concepts subtest. And so the suggested modifications here are that you can ask the child to categorize and classify pictures or photos or toys into semantic categories like fruits, vegetables, furniture, clothing, etc. And then you can ask the child to reclassify the pictures by selected characteristics, attributes, or conditions, such as hot and cold, hard and soft, big and small, etc. This activity allows the child to demonstrate an understanding of several semantic relationships, as well as mental flexibility in the ability to recategorize. And you can compare the results of extension testing to the results of formal testing to identify any accommodations or modifications that the child may need to be successful in a classroom or a home environment. The Academic Language Readiness Index is a composite score that can be obtained for children ages 3 to 6 and can be derived from the scores of the expressive vocabulary following directions and descriptive pragmatics profile subtests. This group of subtests captures semantic and pragmatic language abilities and provides a description of the language and socialization skills that are needed to meet the language demands of the classroom. This score is not intended to assign a diagnostic category, but it can be used to help make recommendations for the classroom setting and help multidisciplinary teams design appropriate instruction. The descriptive pragmatics profile now provides scaled scores. You can use extra forms available in a tear-off pad if you want information from multiple respondents. Again, the scale scores from this subtest contribute to the Academic Language Readiness Index score. The descriptive pragmatics profile is used to determine if a child demonstrates nonverbal and verbal behaviors that may influence social and academic communication. The behaviors evaluated are common daily skills observed across ages and genders in home and classroom situations that are necessary to express intentions. The skills observed are broken into categories, as you can see in the slide: nonverbal communication skills, conversational routines and skills, and asking for, giving, and responding to information. These are samples of the items on the subtests. The Pragmatic Activities Checklist provides a checklist of atypical communication behaviors. So you can observe the child while taking part in interactive activities and throughout the time with him or her, such as meeting the child, walking with him or her back to the testing room, etc. Each behavior on this checklist is noted as not acquired. So you would check any behaviors not observed during testing. These behaviors are developmental, so depending on the child's age, a checked item may not necessarily be a concern. Engage the child in 3 activities to complete the checklist, and you can choose the activities from the list of 6 that are provided in the record form. And here are the activities. Again, the descriptive pragmatic profile provides you with information about the appropriate pragmatic behaviors you or a person familiar with the child has observed. The pragmatic activities checklist is a list of atypical behaviors that you may observe during authentic conversational interactions. So again, engage the child in 3 activities to complete the checklist, and you can choose activities from the list that is provided in the record form. When preparing to engage the child in the activities, note that each activity is designed to take no longer than 5 minutes. Use your judgment to determine when and how you engage the child in each activity. One possibility is to begin with 1 or all 3 activities to establish a rapport with a child before beginning standard testing. Other possibilities include presenting each activity as a break between administrations of other CELF Preschool-3 subtests, or you can present all 3 activities after completing the administration of the CELF Preschool subtests. So it's situational. It depends on you and your judgment of the child and how testing is going. But at the end, or before checking off and filling out this checklist, you want to carefully review the items before working with the child to identify the behaviors that you're looking for and to provide the child with frequent opportunities to demonstrate the behaviors. Here are some examples of items on the pragmatic activities checklist. They're broken down by categories, so nonverbal, gaze, gesture, expression, and body language. Verbal, items that look at the manner of communication, verbal relevance of communication, and verbal quality and quantity of communication. The Phonological Awareness and the Preliteracy rating scale subtests were designed to provide an organized observation of the child's early literacy skills, which are required by many local education agencies as a measure of school quality or student growth. The Early Literacy Index score can be obtained for children ages 4 to 6. A deeper look into the items on the phonological awareness subtest, it includes 6 tasks. So you have compound words, syllable blending, sentence segmentation, syllable segmentation, rhyme detection, and rhyme production. And here's an example of the items for compound words. So the demo goes like this. The examiner says, I'm going to say 2 words. Listen, pan, pause 1 second, cake. I can put these 2 words together to make the word pancake. Now you try it. Put these words together. Rainbow. And if the child responds incorrectly, say the words rain and bow come together to make rainbow. And then present backyard as another trial. Test items are in the Preliteracy rating scale are grouped by early reading skills, such skills like holding a book right side up, turning the pages, and also early writing skills. So skills like drawing or scribbling or writing his or her name. And this contributes to the emerging literacy index along with the phonological awareness subtest. And this does provide scaled scores. The connected speech sample subtest is a new subtest with criterion scores, and it also provides a lot of descriptive information. So you would present the No Juice book to the child and then read the story and then ask the child to retell the story and then record their story retell on the record form in the space provided. We know that oral language abilities are important indicators of future academic success, and although preschoolers' narrative skills are limited because of their young age, most children demonstrate some use of story structure. As children develop, narratives become increasingly embedded in home and classroom activities. Narratives are used to socialize with peers, script pretend play, regulate through processes with self-talk, and interact with adults. So you can rate the child's story retell, you can rate their performance in these 4 areas. Look at story organization, their ability to recall facts and details, their use of story grammar, and also their use of language structures. Here's an example of the rating for story organization and recalling facts and details. This is very quick and simple. So the examiner would look at the child's story retell and read the descriptions under acceptable, emerging, or beginning for story organization, for example, and decide which description closely matches the child's performance. So you would just assign that rating of acceptable if that's the description that matches the child's performance. Same thing for recalling facts and details. Read the descriptions and decide which one closely matches the child's performance to decide on the rating for that. The next piece is the story grammar component, and this scoring table is in the record form. It can be used to score title, setting, characters, main idea, and events in the beginning, middle, and the end. So you would circle each component that the child used in his or her narrative and score each story grammar component according to the point values found in the scoring table, and then sum the score points to compute the total raw score for this subtest. And here's what an example of a scored table for story grammar looks like. So you just run down the list and circle the components that are included and then add up the point values that are associated with that. The next piece is a look at the language structures. You can use the language structures table in the record form that includes an adapted list of Brown's grammatical morphemes and other structures to rate the child's level of mastery as acceptable, emerging, or beginning for each structure that is listed. I want to make the point that you don't have to do all of the structures. You can pick what is something that you want to look more closely at in detail depending on their performance in other areas like standardized testing. The acceptable use of a language structure indicates that the child uses the language structure at a mastery level of 90 to 100% accuracy. And this is the mastery level that was used by Brown as well. Emerging use of a language structure indicates that the child is in a transitional stage of development and demonstrated at least one correct production of that structure. And the beginning use of a language structure indicates that the child has not yet developed the skill and is unable to apply the structure in appropriate situations. Here's an example of what a scored language structures table looks like. And this example is from the manual. Scoring for dialectal variations. Responses to the word structure, expressive vocabulary, recalling sentences, and connected speech sample subtests may contain regional and cultural patterns or variations that reflect dialectal differences from standard American English. So you want to record any such variations verbatim and score them as part of the child's response. It is the examiner's responsibility to become familiar with the language used in the child's home and community to determine if a response is an appropriate variation for the child. If a variation is appropriate to the child's language background, you would score that response as correct. Selected dialectal patterns are presented in the manual along with examples of responses to test items in the CELF Preschool-3 subtests that are considered appropriate for some dialects other than standard American English. The raw score for each subtest is adjusted by the child's age to derive a scaled score. The scaled scores have a mean of 10 and a standard deviation of 3. And as shown previously, the scaled scores for several subtests are combined to yield the core language score and the different index scores. The core language score and the index scores have a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15, which is shown in the shaded areas here. Those scores can be plotted on the record form. The connected speech sample subtests and pragmatic activities checklist allow you to evaluate the child's performance based on specified criteria. Story grammar for the connected speech sample is described as acceptable, emerging, and beginning, and that criteria is dependent on the raw score and dependent on the child's age. And for the pragmatic activities checklist, performance is described as meets criterion or does not meet criterion. And again, that performance is dependent upon the child's age. You can also document qualitative information about a child's behavior during the evaluation using the behavioral observation checklist provided in the record form. This is just a snippet of the information that you can report on a child's behavior. But there are categories like physical activity level of attentiveness, ability to maintain attention and focus, etc. Okay, so now we'll talk about how the test was developed and the research. The CELF Preschool-3 standardization research involved a normative sample of 700 children and additional samples for reliability and validity studies. The normative sample for each age band is highlighted here. It included 100 children. According to the inclusion and exclusion specifications for the normative sample, the children included did not meet the diagnosis criteria for a language impairment, a learning disorder in reading or writing, or a hearing impairment. All children spoke English as their primary language, and that was defined as the language used most often in the home. The sample was stratified by age, sex, race, ethnicity, geographic region, and parent-caregiver education level, and it was matched to a U.S. population as determined by the American Community Survey from the U.S. Census. The demographic subgroups that most influence language development, race, ethnicity, and parent-caregiver education level, were represented by large proportions within 5% of the US population at the time the data was collected. To be included in the normative sample, the children had to meet, they had to be able to take the test in a standard manner without modifications. The child must use spoken language to communicate, must understand and speak English as a primary language. Of this sample, 11% was reported as bilingual by the parents' caregivers, and of the group identified as bilingual, the following languages were reported: Cantonese, Creole, French, German, Greek, Hungarian, Italian, Korean, Portuguese, Spanish, Swiss, Tagalog, Tamil, and Yiddish. Also, to reflect variability in learning needs that naturally occur in the general population, a limited number of children with special education placement were included in the normative sample. Approximately 8% of the children in the normative sample were reported as receiving special services, less than 1% for gifted and talented, 1.3% for occupational and physical therapy, 2% early childhood and other services, and an overlapping 4% received services for both speech and language. The reliability for this test, for the overall normative sample, the average split half reliability coefficients of the CELF Preschool-3 subtest range from 0.8 for sentence comprehension to 0.97 for the Preliteracy rating scale. Overall, the reliabilities for each subtest are good to excellent. Those are the reliabilities for the subtests. The average reliability coefficients are excellent, all above 0.90 for all the composite scores. And for the clinical group, which is a language impairment, the subtest reliability coefficients are consistent with the coefficients reported for the normative sample. This evidence suggests that the CELF Preschool-3 is equally reliable for measuring children's language skills for children from the general population and for children diagnosed with language impairments. The sensitivity and specificity values indicate that the CELF Preschool-3 is a good tool for identifying children with a possible language impairment when used in conjunction with other measures. The cut score of 77 results in the best balance between the sensitivity and specificity measures. The optimal, so this is considered the optimal cut score. Using this cut point resulted in a sensitivity of 89% and a specificity of 84%. This means that using the cut score of 77, 11% of children with a language impairment were missed, and 16% of children without a language impairment were incorrectly identified with a language impairment. The children in this sample who were identified with a language impairment most commonly associated with impaired morphology and syntactic language structures. The corrected correlations of the CELF Preschool-3 and CELF Preschool-2 composite scores are high. Core language score is 0.86. Typically, composite scores are used to make diagnostic and service-related decisions. Therefore, this high correlation between composite scores is a good indication that children's classifications would be similar when taking either test. The CELF Preschool-3 was administered to 79 children diagnosed with a language impairment as part of the standardization validity research. The study compares the performance of children identified with a language impairment and that of a matched control. The standard difference is the effect size, which expresses the difference between two scores in SD units. This allows for comparison of discrepancy scores across tests. Effect sizes of 0.50 are considered moderate, and those of 0.80 and above are considered large. As indicated in the table, the effect size is large for the core language score and for the index scores. These results highlight the ability of the CELF Preschool-3 to discriminate between children who are developing language typically and those who present with a language impairment. So a quick review of the learning outcomes. The first outcome was to list at least 2 differences between the CELF Preschool-2 and the CELF Preschool-3. So one of the differences is there is a new subtest, the connected speech sample subtest, and also the pragmatic activities checklists. There are scale scores for the phonological awareness, the descriptive pragmatics profile, and the preliteracy rating scale. And you have the 2 new index scores, the academic language readiness index and the early literacy index score. The second outcome is to explain how to obtain and score the connected speech sample using the No Juice book. So what you do for the administration is read the No Juice book aloud to the child and ask the child to retell the story, document the child's retelling, and then based on the child's narrative, calculate a raw score for story grammar, and look at the components of the story, like setting, characters, main idea, etc. And you can also score the language structures that they used as acceptable, emerging, or beginning. And the third outcome was to list at least 2 subtests that comprise the Academic Language Readiness Index and the Early Literacy Index. So the Academic Language Readiness Index is comprised of the expressive vocabulary subtest, the following directions subtest, and the descriptive pragmatics profile. And the early literacy index is comprised of the phonological awareness subtest and the preliteracy rating scale. We have come to the end of today's presentation. I do want to let everybody know that in 2 days, on November 19th, we're going to have a more in-depth presentation on the interpretation of CELF Preschool-3 results. So if you haven't signed up for that webinar and you're interested in that webinar, you can also obtain ASHA CE credits for logging into that one as well. I believe it's the same time on November 19th, but check the Pearson Assessments website for information and to be able to sign up. For more information, contact customer support. The numbers are provided for US and for Canada. And also, if you have any additional questions, you can contact us at pearsonassessments.com or contact your Pearson consultant. Here's the information for ASHA CEs. Remember, don't hand anything in after November 24th. You got to hand in your either your printed CE forms or your emailed CE forms by November 24th. Were there any questions that have not been answered during the presentation? Do we have any outstanding questions that need to be answered?
There are no outstanding ones, but there are a few questions that I think might be of general interest. So one person asked about administering CELF Preschool via telepractice. We don't have continuing education options for looking at each individual test, but there's going to be on December 2nd a panel of experts talking about delivering assessments via telepractice. I'm not sure that our registration form is available yet, but check back at pearsonassessments.com, search for webinars, and the registration link should be available in a couple of weeks. Let me look and see if there was something else. Someone asked about Spanish versions of the test. We have not been able to collect data on any of our assessments, English or Spanish, since March 2020, and do not have a date to start that up again. So there won't be a Spanish version of this test available soon. The CELF Preschool-2 Spanish is the most current version available for CELF Preschool right now. And I'm sorry, I keep jumping back to the wrong slide. In addition to the, I had forgotten this, in addition to the telepractice panel that will be held on December 2nd, there are a lot of resources online. If you go to pearsonassessments.com/telepractice, there's a lot of information and how-tos on how to do assessments via telepractice. And you can find a lot of general information there as well as on asha.org. The digital options, so the Q Global digital kit is available now, and it's available on the pearsonassessments.com website. The Q Interactive version and Q Global scoring for CELF Preschool-3 will not be available until March 2021. We've had some delays with that. Someone asked about the No Juice book, if it was like, if the story is like the Goldman Fristo. So the No Juice book is in an actual print book with pages that you turn in the print and Q Global digital editions of the tests. So when you order a digital edition of Q Global, you have the choice of either using a digital No Juice book or a print No Juice book. Both are included in the kit. In case you purchased CELF Preschool-3 on Q Global and you don't see the components in your account, check with your Q Global administrator. The administrator has to assign a user to each of the components that you ordered. And until they're assigned to you, they won't show up in your Q Global. They won't show up in the resource library for your account. Someone asked about having additional forms, and I'm assuming for the Pragmatics profile and the Preliteracy rating scale. If you want to have multiple informants fill out those forms, the kits come with it. Besides being in the record form, they also come in a tear-off pad, and you can distribute those to multiple informants. If there's only one place, though, to record a single score, so you would either need to on Q Interactive. So that'd probably be better to describe when we actually have all of Q Interactive to demo for you, because we haven't finished the development of that yet. And I believe the others Patricia talked about during this session about the bias review panels and the content review panels and the representation of different racial and ethnic groups in the sample. Questions about CE forms there, and I believe it looks like Sherry answered this for people, but it's below the chat box. Click on event resources and you download the forms from there. The handouts were there as well. And our ASHA CEUs given for watching but not having Pearson report to ASHA. We submit the forms to ASHA, and if you are with the ASHA registry, that will be automatically assigned to your account. If not, you need to submit the information to ASHA. You don't have to be part of the registry to get CEUs, but then you'll have to submit information to ASHA on your own. And I believe that covers it. We're at the top of the hour. Thanks for joining us today.